The 2024 Olympics in Paris are in full swing, and not without a fair amount of controversy. I think it's fair to say that Parisians are not thrilled to be hosting the Olympic Games, and there are clear impacts on the city. You might not realize it, but at one point in time, Boston was a contender for these games. How close were we to dealing with even more traffic, full train lines, and fans from around the world, along with a host of other issues? Would city officials have been able to clean the Charles River for the triathlon? Would the opening ceremonies consisted of boats in the Boston Harbor instead of the River Seine? Let's find out. But first, we express our love for Boston through apparel. Check out our Etsy store for more. Way back in 2013, the U.S. Olympic Committee decided to pick an American city to work a bid for the 2024 Summer Olympic Games. I'm not really sure what criteria the U.S. Olympic Committee was using to pick an American city to begin with, but Boston was selected in January of 2015 as the American bid over the three other finalists of Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. As Boston began to explore what hosting the 2024 Olympics would look like, they kept making mistakes. While high-level dreams were communicated externally by the group managing Boston's bid, the execution was never communicated to key players. For example, even though Franklin Park was being widely broadcast as a key venue in the games, the Franklin Park Coalition reportedly never received details on how this would look. There was also a massive question of public funding. While the group managing Boston's bid broadcasted that no public funds would be used to host the games, an assessment found this claim to be untrue. Look, the Big Dig had concluded less than a decade prior, and the cost overruns and schedules related to that mega project probably still weighed heavy on the minds of locals. The bid continued to meet opposition from Bostonians, and polling numbers about enthusiasm for the games continued to indicate a lack of interest to locals, especially due to the expected taxpayer cost of the games. Just 6 months after announcing its bid as a host city, Boston withdrew its proposal for hosting the 2024 Summer Olympics. Paris was ultimately chosen in 2017. Regardless, it's fun and maybe a tad stressful for some to talk about what the 2024 Boston Summer Olympic Games would have looked like. Boston's bid was interesting to begin with because the city does not have a main Olympic stadium. The closest thing to a main Olympic stadium would have been Gillette Stadium, but Gillette Stadium doesn't have enough room for a track. Initial plans were to build a temporary venue just south of Boston. Obviously, there are so many more events than just the ones happening in the main Olympic Stadium. Boston wanted to avoid a situation where there were a ton of abandoned stadiums like Beijing in 2008 and Sochi in 2012 after the games, so the plan was to utilize venues at the colleges and universities in the area. From an infrastructure standpoint, at face value, this makes sense as colleges don't have many students in the summer. Harvard Stadium is a National Historic Landmark. It would be fun to watch some field hockey or other events here. Boston College has a similar setup, and Northeastern and Boston University each have indoor arenas. Outside of neighboring schools, the tentative plan was to plug into other iconic Boston locations that already exist. Assuming baseball would have been a part of the games, Fenway Park could serve as a venue while the Red Sox were out of town during the summer. Fenway could also work for soccer if needed if Gillette Stadium didn't suffice for some reason. TD Garden, home to the Boston Celtics and Boston Bruins, could also host a slew of indoor events. Sailing would work just fine in the Boston Harbor. The Charles River is already home to a famous regatta, although due to bridges, some events would likely have needed to shift to the Merrimack River. Brookline Country Club is no stranger to a PGA major. They could host golf. The marathon, well, we have a well-established route already, even if it needed to be altered slightly for the Olympics. Instead of beach volleyball next to the Eiffel Tower, perhaps it could have been at the start of the Freedom Trail in the Boston Common. The area already does host concerts. MIT had already been identified as a place for fencing and archery, and the Tufts Hospital for Large Animals was slotted for care for horses and equestrian events. Most of these places I have mentioned are on public transportation and close to city center, so that would have been convenient assuming the subway, aka T, received increased funding for the games. Obviously, all of this stuff going on over a couple weeks span would have been crazy, but Boston certainly at least has experience working all of these types of events already, so the Olympics could have plugged right into that existing network. So besides the actual athletic venues, how else could Boston have responded to infrastructure questions? In terms of places to stay, Boston is no stranger to hosting tourists, over 22 million people visited Boston in 2019, and numbers have returned close to that level post-COVID. Thus, the city already had the required 45,000 hotel rooms that an Olympic host must have. Riding Boston's T would have been a viable option for getting around, as the organizers were targeting to have 90% of the venues to be within 3.5 miles of city center. Bostonians watching this video know that the T has a bad reputation. It's quite average at best. However, one interesting wrinkle that we will only know the truth about in an alternate timeline is if the T would have been prioritized financially had the city hosted the games. The goal was to leverage the Olympics as an excuse to improve the T, but this leverage was lost when Boston withdrew their bid. A fair counter-argument is that Boston would have just screwed up the improvement of the T like they have in the past decade. Anyways, I guess we'll never know. Luckily, Boston is a pretty walkable city to begin with. In terms of an Olympic village, see my earlier comment about college campuses being dormant in the summer. Boston would be able to work with local universities that already have dorms. There's precedent for this already, as the 1984 Olympic Games in Los Angeles housed athletes on UCLA's campus, and although we didn't know it in 2015, we'll do the same in the 2028 Olympics. In fact, the initial plan for Boston's Olympic Village was to use an existing plan at the time from UMass Boston to add 5,000 residential units to convert the school from a commuter campus to one that is more residential. This would have benefited both the Olympic Planning Committee and help them solve their housing problem, as well as provide supplemental funding for UMass Boston to achieve their goals. In all, I'm happy that Boston did not get the 2024 Olympics. In theory, it's a really fun topic to think about. I would have absolutely loved walking to the T and getting to go watch some iconic worldwide event. Definitely a once-in-a-lifetime event, and how many people get to live in a city that is hosting the Olympic Games? In reality though, I'm pretty sure Boston would have been a nightmare during the games. Traffic is bad enough without the Olympics, and the T, assuming it even worked, would have been packed the whole time. Security would have been all over the place, and daily routines no doubt would have been completely interrupted. It would be worth exploring whether or not to leave the city during the Olympics just to avoid all of this inevitable chaos. Also, even though organizers say that taxpayers wouldn't have been left paying for the games, I'm always skeptical of these promises, and there is data to show that these types of promises are typically empty promises, or that city and taxpayer will end up paying for these games in some other unseen way that's not quite as obvious. Do you agree? Or would you rather have dealt with the side effects and gone to all the events? Let me know in the comments. Also, I look forward to coming back to this video in 2028 and seeing how the Olympics go for Los Angeles. If you're from LA and watching this video, I'm curious to know if the same issues mentioned above will apply to you, or if you're incredibly excited for your city to host the event for the third time. Similar to Boston's plan, it appears as though LA is using this event as an excuse to make upgrades to their public transportation. I'm cynical, but I'm also rooting for their success in this area as a proponent of public transportation. So this concludes my quick hypothetical of what it would have been like for Boston to host the 2024 Olympic Games. Fun in theory, bad in practice. Please let me know in the comments if I missed any important talking points about Boston hosting the 2024 Olympics. Please like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe to see similar videos. If you're moving to Boston or planning on visiting sometime soon, I hope you find these videos helpful. I started this channel to help make one person's transition to Boston easier. I think I've done that at least once. Now I want to do it just a few more times.